Parshas Beshalach. So as the Parshios of Shmos, Shovavim, unfold, we know it's a process. We know that every Parsha there's a development and that everything is surging to the climax. And the climax is both Har Sinai at one level, and it is the Mishkan at a different level. But we know that there's a gradual development, and what happens in Bo is a advance as to what happens in Va'era, certainly vis-a-vis Paro and the punishments that are delivered to the Egyptians and the Avdei Paro, the great miracles, V'hotzesi, V'hitzalti, V'ga'alti, V'lakachti. We tend to view those four Lashonos as overlapping. There are four different facets of Geula, four different kosos of Geula, four different Lashonos of Geula. Some, for example, the Netziv, read them as four different stages, and we segue from V'hotzesi to V'hitzalti, V'ga'alti, V'lakachti, with V'lakachti being that climax at Har Sinai. So a lot of different processes are unfolding. One process that we're a little bit less attuned to, because in our day and age, unfortunately, we've moved away from the study of theology and philosophy, and you say those words and they sound very, to some people, they sound very incongruous with frumkeit and piety, and I think we're going to pay a price. I know why it's happened. After the Holocaust, I think theology became very frightening because there were real issues that we didn't have answers to. So I think that we walked away from it. I think the state of Israel and our return to Israel, whether it's the state for those who see it as a divine interdiction, or just the experience of being in Israel as this big theological vacuum cleaner, and we vacuum up any mess, but we're in Israel, and Hashem gave us Israel, and we don't study faith and theology as much as we once did. And I wonder if down the line we're going to pay a price for that, because we aren't grounded in emunas videos as maybe we should. And one could counterclaim and say that we are living with simple emunah pshuta. We don't need that level of inquiry. But emunah pshuta sometimes proves very brittle as generations unfold, especially given a very aggressive, almost unavoidable cultural encounter. We can't really live in the shtetl anymore. Anyway, it's getting a little bit far afield, but there is a development of theology, of Am Yisrael understanding more about the Ribono Shel Olam in every Parsha. And to fully appreciate this, let's go back to the Sneh just for a moment. After Moshe raises his concerns, they won't believe me, lo ya'aminu li, Paro won't listen to me, ani aral svasayim. One of the issues that concerns Moshe, that frustrates Moshe, is how will I explain you to them? You are appearing to me in a burning bush. You are a mystery. You are transcendent. How will I explain you to them? And Hashem says, Ekia asher Ekia. Some say it's Hashem Hashem, so some people are makbid not to say Ehyeh. But essentially Hashem says, you're right. I can't expect them to understand that much about me at this stage. Just tell them that I was there for their parents and I will be there for them. Ekia asher Ekia. But as the Parshas unfold, Am Yisrael learns more about the Ribono Shel Olam. Interestingly enough, not for now, much of that instruction comes through the Makos, which are not just punitive plagues for Egypt, but they're also monotheistic lessons for the Egyptians, but for Am Yisrael as well. But anyway, getting to Beshalach, there's a major monotheistic lesson that Beshalach teaches Am Yisrael. And let's take a few steps back to appreciate the lesson. There are three types of mitzvos that we are commanded. Most mitzvos are mechanical with our bodies. Take a lulav, eat matzah, sit in the sukkah, wear tzitzis. And regarding those mitzvos, we paskin mitzvos ein tzrichas kavana. You don't need to orient them mentally to a particular target. You just have to be aware consciously that you're performing. If you're drunk, you don't know you're picking up a lulav, you're not yotze. But if you know you're picking up a lulav, you just don't know the inner symbolisms, or you're not mischavin to be yotze the mitzvah, kavana latzes, you're still yotze. Mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. So those are relatively easy mitzvahs because they're mechanical. There are mitzvahs which are theological, mitzvahs to believe in Hashem, mitzvahs not to believe in Avodah Zarah. They're a little bit harder because they're not mechanical, but they can be studied. These are ideas, tenets of belief, values that could be studied and assimilated. But then there's a third category of mitzvahs that are emotions. And there are two emotions we're meant to feel vis-a-vis the Ribono Shel Olam and their mitzvahs. One is Ahavat Hashem, ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol miyodecha. And one is a mitzvah of Yir'at Hashem, es Hashem Elokecha tira, masot tavod, v'osid bok, v'shbot tishaveh. And these mitzvahs provide two challenges. One, how can you legislate emotions? How can you force people to feel an emotion? Two is, even if you could, how do you feel emotions towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Which requires us to redefine Ahavas Hashem and Yir'at Hashem from their standard definition, and this is of course based on the Rambam, both in Hilchos Yisodei Atara, Parak Aleph, Hilchos Tshuva, Parak Yod, Yisodei Atara, Parak Beis, Hilchos Tshuva, Parak Yod, with some differences. Essentially for the Rambam, especially in Tshuva, Parak Yod, Ahavas Hashem is achieved not by saying I love Hashem. How do you love Hashem? I love chocolate milk. This is water, but I love chocolate milk. Okay, it gets stuck on my tongue, but I love chocolate milk. How do I love HaKadosh Baruch Hu? But as you grow older, the objects of your love become more subtle and more mature. You don't love elements that taste good or that make your heart beat faster, like a movie or good food or something that stimulates your body. You love people and ideas and lifestyles that make you better. So I love my wife because we've lived for 34 years, the 35th anniversary this year, and she's made me a better person. I love my Rebbe, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, because of how he changed my life. And when mapped onto the Ribono Shel Olam, I want to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu because I understand the synchronicity between His will and my welfare, my benefits. If I see Avodas Hashem, mitzvos, Torah mitzvos, as beneficial for me, as enhancing rather than suffocating my life, as improving me rather than stifling me, then I love HaKadosh Baruch Hu because He made my life better. So when I understand the Ribono Shel Olam and I understand the overlap between His will and my interest, then I love Him. And that's more or less the Rambam's language in Hilchos Tshuva, Parak Yud, Oses emes v'pnei shu emes v'sofa tavalavo biglala. The Rambam describes mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem. To one that understands religion inherently, doesn't perform religion as a cop-out or just struggling because he wants schar, but because you see it emes v'pnei shu emes. By contrast, Yir'at Shamayim is not fearing Hashem, though there is a baseline of Yir'as Honesh, but the Yir'as Haromimos that our Chazal speak of, our Masorah speaks of, the Rambam speaks of, is what we would call awe, but it's probably even better to describe it as a two-stage process. It is recognizing the distance between human beings and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's called transcendence, accepting that distance, accepting the mystery of an impenetrable and unknowable HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and submitting to His will based on His being a higher authority, a higher wisdom. It's really a two-step process. It's accepting the distance, recognizing the distance, not self-deifying or not humanizing Hashem, but allowing that distance to exist. And because of that distance, submitting to the will of the Ribono Shel Olam. And Yir'at Shamayim is not understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but worshiping Him, fulfilling His will, when you don't understand Hashem. When you understand Hashem, that's when Ahavas Hashem kicks in. You understand Hashem's desire is beneficial to you. You understand the reason, the logic, the purpose, and therefore you love Him because you see it as contributing to human welfare and well-being. When you can't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, that's when Yir'at Shamayim emerges. So Ahavas Hashem and Yir'at Hashem can be achieved by two different fronts. The understanding front, the synchronizing His will and your will front, is the road to Ahavas Hashem. Oh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will synchronizes with my interest. I love Him for Kihem Chayenu v'Orech Yameinu Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Amim v'Nasan Lanu Taras Emes v'Chayo Lameta B'Suchenu Shehem Mishtachavim Lehevel V'Reko Mispalim Elel Yashiv Anachnu Korb Shelo Asanu Kikayr Asas V'Los Ashreinu Matov Chalkeinu Manam Garleinu V'Yifa Yushaseinu. Yir'at Shamayim is when you're in Auschwitz and you can't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, whether it's regarding a mitzvah that you can't understand, or a personal circumstance that you can't make sense of, or a national collective experience that's traumatic, and you draw upon your Yir'at Shamayim. So, for example, I'll talk about this later. Avram Avinu at Har Moriah is not called an Ohev Hashem, he's called a Yir'at Shamayim. Ate Yadati Kirei L'Kimata, because there is no way that Avram can, or should for that matter, understand the Akedah in human terms. He just has to submit to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine Ratzon. So now the question is, having defined Ava and Yira, which comes first? And what's the interplay between the two? And what does all this have to do with Parshas Beshalach? I promise you, there is a tie-in. But we're going to have to get to it. It's going to take a little bit of time. Classically, the classic route, the route described by the Rambam in Yesod Torah, is that Ahava yields Yira. Namely, until you try to understand Hashem, and until you understand Hashem's Ratzon through the frequency of Ahava, you can't begin to understand what you don't understand. It would be like me and Einstein discussing physics. He knew what he didn't know more clearly than I would know what I don't know, because he knew so much more about physics than I'll ever know. And something so large, and certainly something L'Havdil, so infinite as Rabbanu Shalom, the more you know, the more you know you don't know. Rabbi Soloveitchik had an interesting phrase for this. Those who know its context, it's a little bit strange to use the phrase, Megala tefach u'mechaset tefachayim. You uncover one tefach, and then you realize that the more you've understood and uncovered, the more that remains concealed and beyond. Those who understand the halachic context, it's a strange phrase, but... So, the process starts with trying to understand Hashem, and not just trying but understanding Hashem, because if you try and fail, then you don't know anything about Hashem, so you don't know what you don't know. You have to get traction, you have to have momentum, you have to acquire a certain base of knowledge. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you try to push the envelope and acquire more understanding and more knowledge, and then you hit that bump or that glass ceiling, and you can't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the Rambam's discussion. B'shah she'isbonin Adam in Hilchos Yesod Torah Perek Beis Beruv V'Maisa V'Menu Niflo Shein Kamo Kein Shein Tachlis. You see the infinity, the beauty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Miyad Hu Nirta Lachorav. He's thrown back. V'Yedeshu Beria Feila Shveila. And you realize how worthless you are, which is essentially tracing David HaMelech's discovery into Tehillim Perek Ches Ma Enosh Ki Tizkerenu. Ki era shamecha maseetz v'osecha yirech v'kochav v'masher kananta. When I study your world and I understand your world, what's my initial kickback? Ma enosh ki tizkvenu v'enadam ki tifkedenu v'techasreo ma'at me'elokim. Tehillim Perek Ches. When I study Ki era shamecha maseetz v'osecha, the sky, that your handiwork, ma enosh ki tizkvenu. I realize how futile and inadequate and meaningless and limited human beings are in your presence. So the process is a process of starting with Ahavas Hashem, understanding Hashem, and then when you understand, then only then can you understand how little you understand. That's how the Rambam describes the process, and that was the life's arc of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu is the only person in Tanakh to be referred to both as an Ohev Hashem and as a Yir'at Shamayim. Yeshaya refers to Avram, Mem Aleph or Mem Daled, Zera Avraham Ohavi. The only person. Why is Avram referred to as the Ohev Hashem? He's the quintessential Ohev Hashem because he was the first person in 2,000 years to detect the overlap between Ratzon Hashem and Ratzon Adam, because for 2,000 years humanity lived in theological mayhem, assuming gods were angry, grotesque figures in heaven with fangs and claws who toyed with human playthings for sport, and were angry, arbitrary, random, militant, violent, because that's all they saw. They saw a world of destruction and dispersion and floods and expulsion and apocalypse. And they didn't understand that these were natural, supernatural disasters wrought by human misbehavior. And Avram was the first person to discover a moral spirit, a God that cared, a compassionate God, a God that wanted human welfare. And he preached this monotheism to an entire world. And therefore, he wasn't just the Ish Hamun, he was also the Ish HaChesed. He had to also be an agent of Chesed, not just describe a Baal HaChesed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Avram revolutionized the concept of religion that could enable Ahavas Hashem, because until someone spoke about a compassionate, kind, caring, Rachamim Chesed V'Shalom HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ahavas Hashem was impossible. And therefore he's called an Ohev Hashem. But at the end of his career, he is given the final test. I know that you can serve me when you understand me, but can you serve me when you don't understand me? And that's the Akedah, because there's no way he can or should understand the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that's why when he succeeds and he passes that test, Ata yadati ki yirei Elokim ata. I knew that you were an Ahavat Hashem throughout your entire career, but now I know you are Yir'at Shamayim. And the Akedah has to come last. Because until Avram understands Hashem, it's not a trial, because if you don't understand Hashem yet, the Avram of Lech Lecha, so you're not being a full, profound Yir'at Shamayim, because you don't think you understand Hashem. You haven't reached the threshold of understanding that you can then say, oh, now that I understand, I know how little I know. Avram doesn't yet fully understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Lech Lecha, so he can't understand what he can't understand. By the end of Vayera, he understands so much, and by understanding so much of the infinity and the godless and the eternity of Hashem, you realize how little you understand. And you're prepared to be a Yir'at Shamayim and prepared to submit at the Akedah. So Yira, this is the classic approach. There's some Rishonim that offer other interactions and dynamics between Ava and Yira, but Ava yields Yira. Until you start to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you don't know how little you know. It's like going to a base medrash. Think of all those people listening to the shir who learned in yeshiva. When you started your yeshiva career, when you were very young, if maybe you're still young, and you didn't know that much Torah. A couple months or years into your time in yeshiva, were you a bigger Talmud Chacham or a bigger Amaretz? Well, it depends. In quantified terms, you're a bigger Talmud Chacham, but in subjectivist terms, you're a bigger Amaretz, because you knew so much Torah, you started to unpeel and uncover the eternity of Torah, and you knew how little you knew. So you were a bigger Amaretz. You were a Talmud Chacham about the fact that you were an Amaretz. That's what yeshiva's goal is, not to be a Talmud Chacham, but to be a Talmud Chacham about the fact that you're an Amaretz. And the biggest gadol in the room is the biggest Amaretz in subjectivist terms, because he is most acutely aware of how limited he is in his knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. The same way L'havdil Einstein is more aware of his limited knowledge in physics than I am, because I can't even begin to articulate what I know and what I don't know compared to Einstein. What does all this have to do with Parshas Beshalach? Well, there's a pasuk in Parshas Beshalach that captures both Ahava and Yira, and Ahava yielding Yira. But in Parshas Beshalach, Ahava is not called Ahava, it is called Re'iyah. Vayar Yisrael es hayad hagidola asher asa Hashem beMitzrayim. They saw the Yad Hashem, not Etzba Elokim Hi, but Yad Hashem. Remember the Haggadah in Mitzrayim, Etzba, Alayam, Yad, 5, X, whatever the X in Mitzrayim was. Say right after Dayenu, so we're rushing through to get to the Pesach Matzah Umar, Yisrael, Rabbi Akiva. They saw more of HaKadosh Baruch Hu than they'd ever seen. And it was cumulative. It wasn't just the Yamsuf, but the Yamsuf was obviously, as Chazal say, Rosh Shif Chaliyam, Mashal Araya Cheskel Ben Buti Miyamav. Even a simple person at the Yamsuf saw a level of Gila Shechina, a level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revelation that even some of the most prophetic and celestial Nevi'im didn't behold, didn't partake, didn't perceive. So once they saw so much Vayar, then they realized how little they knew, which they could only realize once they saw as much as they could imagine seeing. For Isa Sachar, Moshe can only appreciate how little he knows when he sees the back of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He goes, I'm only seeing the back. At that point, having seen so much and understood, not just seeing, but understood, Vayiru emes Hashem, vayaminu b'Hashem uve Moshe avdo. Ava, or Re'iyah, yielded Yira. With the intentional play on words between Re'iyah and Yira, without getting back into the Akedah, because those two words are also bubbling beneath the surface in the Akedah. Behar Hashem Yira'eh Atoyadati Ki Yira'eh. You're coming to see or to be seen. Behar Hashem Yira'eh, to be seen, because you can't really see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because this is a moment of Yir'at Shamayim, so you're Yira'eh, not Yir'eh. Elokim Yir'eh lo hasel li lo b'ni. He will show you, so you can see the seh. You can see the ayel, v'hinei ayel acher nachaz basvach bikarnav. But you can't see Hashem. You can only behar Hashem Yira'eh. So the Yam Suf, they're starting to see the Nisim of Hashem, the Shkach of Hashem, the Yir'at Hashem, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the more they see, the more they realize, oh, this just doesn't compute. I can't fully understand because there's so much more to understand. And then they're led to Yira, and the consequence of Yira is Kabbalas Malchus Shamayim V'Aminu, Kabbalas Mitzvos. They don't have mitzvos yet, obviously. For us, Yir'at Shamayim doesn't just lead to Kabbalas Malchus Shamayim, but to Kabbalas Mitzvos. And to say it differently, Re'iyah yields Yira, Re'iyah/Ava. Without trying to understand Hashem, you can't realize how little you know. Once you achieve Yira, knowing that you don't know, then you preserve the integrity of your Re'iyah, because if you think you know Hashem, you don't know Him. If you know you don't know Him, then you know Him. Say it again. If you think you know Hashem, you don't know Him because you're humanizing and limiting Him. Knowing that you don't know Him is the clearest knowledge of Hashem. Knowing how you don't, it's called negative capability. So Re'iyah yields Yira. Yira preserves the integrity of your Re'iyah, that whatever I'm saying, I know it's just a small piece of the Melech Malchei HaMelachim. And that's the lesson they learn at the Yam Suf. A, the desire to know Hashem and to translate knowledge into relationship. B, the experience of Yiras Hashem, to know how little you know. C, that you only reach the recognition that you don't know when you try to know and you accomplish some of that knowledge. Vayar Yisrael asayad hagdolah asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim vayiram as Hashem vayaminu b'Hashem uver Moshe avda. Shabbat shalom.